Go with me, if you would, to Deuteronomy chapter 6. If you're noticing in your booklet on top of page 11, that the title there given is Life Has Rules. Life does have rules. We do our children a great favor and a great service when we teach them to have rules as well. Because life has rules. Life will always have rules. And as we said earlier, we need to raise our children in a way that emulates the truth and the reality that is in the world. If you're there, Deuteronomy chapter 6. Now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land to which you are going to possess it, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your sons' son, by keeping His statutes and His commandments, which I command you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Verse 3, and the verses there following, verse 4 particularly, is what the Israelites would have called the Shema. I think many of them would have said the Shema. And it basically is, hear, listen to this. Verse 3, hear therefore. When I say it in this verse, I tend to want to say it more the way they would have said it. We say Israel. They would have said Israel. Hear, O Israel, and be careful, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Verse 4, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk with them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. And when the Lord your God brings you into the land that He swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, to give you, with great and good cities that you did not build, and houses full of all good things that you did not fill, and cisterns that you did not dig, and vineyards and olive trees that you did not plant. And when you eat and are full, then take care lest you forget the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It is the Lord your God you shall fear, Him you shall serve, and by His name you shall swear. This is one of those places that I was implying a moment ago that keeps reminding us of what God has offered us and what He asked of us. And what God really asked of them was to be faithful in that land and to be grateful in that land. When it comes right down to it, back to my simplicity theme, our Lord says, I will forgive you your sins. And what does He want from us? He wants us to be faithful to Him, and He wants us to always be grateful to Him. And we ought to be. We should be. We were making plans to come. One of the things I was really glad to hear was when we had a discussion with Evan about the desire to have somewhat of a teacher encouragement, a teacher session, because the truth is, in any church, it's the teaching of our children that has to be of utmost importance. And sometimes you just need a little encouragement in that direction. We all do. The ladies that are with us have got years and years of experience in doing just that. As I said, Sandy has been teaching a Bible class since she was in 6th grade. Lindsay, her degree from Harding is in child development. She has worked with 2 churches now as one who gives the guidance for their youngest of children. She does a great thing called Bible benchmarks that just trains children up to know things and to let the church show them how much appreciation they have for them when they show that they have made and met particular benchmarks. One of the things, and she could explain this better, but one of the great things they've done is they've instituted, as I said, these Bible benchmarks, and a child in Bible class can say, I want to do one of my benchmarks right now, at the end of a class. And if they can, do whatever it was, it may be a memory, it may be a list of things that they were trying to remember. Maybe they were trying to remember the books of the Old Testament or something, or maybe the benchmark they're trying to reach was to know the apostles or something like that, And so what the church gets trained to do is to recognize that when a child is wearing one of those stickers, that meant they just made a benchmark in their Bible class. So when the people out in the worship assembly or out in the hallways would see a child any Sunday or any Wednesday night or whenever it was with a sticker on, they would know that child just passed a benchmark. And so they would see that kid walk up with a sticker. Hey, buddy, I see you got a sticker. Wow, what did you do, And encouraging them and encouraging these kids, because we need to be encouraging our kids. That's exactly what Deuteronomy chapter 6 is telling us to do, to encourage the kids. He says, I've got rules for you, and I want you to live by these rules. He said, but you've also got to teach these things to your children. You got to bring them up to know who He is. And that's the most important thing that we will do. You can just notice, you can look at my list if you want there, but we'll not enlarge on it too much just because of time. And that's one of the reasons I give it to you in printed form, is in hopes that maybe you'll pick it up here in a few days and look at a few of these things and study them maybe even a little bit deeper. Life has rules that we are to follow, verse 1. These rules, verse 2, are to be passed down through the generations. These rules emanate from the God who created us. That's why He gets to make the rules. They are leading us to be like Him, verse 4, because that's what it's all about. Verse 4 gives us one of the foundational principles of all of Scripture. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. The Shema, that statement in verse 4 and 5. The Israelites would say that every day as they would offer their prayers 3 times a day. Hear, O Israel. They reminded themselves that the Lord was God. Verse 7 lets us know, and then the following verses, that those rules will be passed down through diligent effort. And then in verse 12 he reminds it, as he reminds them often, that the rules have consequences for disobedience. And then just an application in getting us back more toward children, the next statement there is that consequences are coming. For your actions are coming. And I tried to express the statement pretty intentional. Either in the process of parenting or in life or in eternity, but the consequences are coming. The lesson is coming. The world is going to teach your child that they are not the most important thing in this world. You will do your child a favor by teaching that before the world teaches that, because you will do it with love. The world will do it with a kick in the seat. I haven't really said much about this book. I intended to bring it, but I've moved to a new office. My bookcases are half built, and the reason they're half built is because I have a little problem with the builder. I used to tell people when I was building a house, they said, "Well, how's your house going?" I said I've got no problems, because I'm having a problem with my electrician, I'm having a problem with my framer, and I'm having a problem with my cabinet guy. And they said, "Well, what problems are you having?" I said, "I am the electrician, I am the framer, and I am the cabinet guy. That's my problems. I'm always my worst problem, right?" That's just sort of the way it is. But my little Luke that I was talking about earlier, I built these, and I built some really nice, like 13, almost 14 foot of a bookcase. And I made this bookcase that looks like it's built in, but it's actually built in modules so I can move it. And the reason is I don't know how long my office is going to be in this space, and I'm not about to leave that bookcase that I just spent all this time on in that office. It's going with me wherever I go, because it's cherry and it matches the desk that's there, and all this sort of thing. Well, I got the frame of the bookcase, but not the shelves. I still don't have the shelves. Well, about a few weeks of that, and I'm like, I need my books. So I pulled all my books out of the boxes, and I just stacked them on stacks. Like each section that's going to have about 6 bookshelves in it, they're just stacks, and they're all this way, And so I have to look at my books like that. I couldn't find this book. That's my point. Little Luke walks in the other day. It was a while back, to be honest with you, and the first time he had seen the books out. Luke literally, and like I say, he's a savvy 5-year-old, right? He walks in, he looks at the bookcase, and he goes, he looks at me and he says, "Pop, that ain't how that works." He said, "That's not right." I'm like, "Go eat a piece of candy and be quiet, kid. Be nice. Leave me alone." Point is, we're going to learn that we're not the biggest thing in the world. And your children have been given a great service if you're the one that teaches them. I almost bypassed what I was headed toward, and that was Dr. Shaw's book. There is a book that I would recommend to any parent, any prospective parent. Get this book. It's worth the read. The book is called Epidemic. Maybe it's The Epidemic, but it's Epidemic by Dr. Shaw. And interesting thing about the book is when you get through with the book, you realize, you pick the book up because you thought kids these days. Yeah, kids these days. They're not what they used to be. They're rambunctious and they're undisciplined. Well, what you learn through the reading of the book is the epidemic is not the kids. The epidemic is the parents. And he makes a statement, I think it's the statement that I've got there at the end of that section. He says, well, it's sort of the statement. He said, "It is possible for a parent to make it clear that he or she will not bargain under duress. Children are very bright and learn the rules rapidly. The problem is that we are teaching them the wrong rules." One of the things that many a parent have successfully taught their child is that if you fuss long enough, you will get what you want. And once a child learns that lesson, oh my, it is difficult to unlearn. It is difficult to unlearn. John Locke, the famous philosopher of a few centuries ago, he's quoted by Dr. Shaw in The Epidemic with this quote. He says, "Parents wonder why the streams are bitter when they themselves have poisoned the fountain." Let's talk a little bit about a spoiled child. A spoiled child loses so terribly much. Got another quote I wanted to read here. This is Dr. Dan Kindlin, who is quite the expert. He's a professor of psychology out of Harvard. His book is called Too Much of a Good Thing. I haven't read the book, but I've seen a lot from it, but I never read the book in full. But one of his quotes out of the book is this: when we think of self-centeredness, it conjures up an egocentric toddler who believes he is the most important and special thing in the universe. All children start out at this point. Indeed, responding to their every want and need as infants is what helps form that all-important bond of attachment he'd been talking about earlier in the chapter. But the infant grows into a toddler who requires training from his caregivers to comprehend his realistic place in the family hierarchy, ultimately the rest of the world. You see, we don't teach children to be selfish. They are already. We don't teach them that they are the center of the universe. They believe that already. If we fail them, where we fail them is that we never teach them differently. Because when they're babies, they are helpless. They are the center of your universe. I find it interesting to talk to new parents after week 1. I'm like, life's a little different, isn't it? And they're always like, yes, I need a nap. Every time, you know. Life is a lot different because they are consumed with that child. And that child demands attention 24/7. Now, they're not demanding attention every moment, but they're demanding monitoring every minute of the day. Every minute of the day. Because the child is the center of the universe. And we are so happy to make them the center of our universe. Went down to hospital, UAMS, that doesn't mean anything to you. The University of Arkansas Medical Science campuses, a good friend of ours was having surgery for cancer. Well, they had just had a new grandbaby. Let me see the picture. You know you're going to look at it anyway. Act like you want to see it, you know. And plus, these are friends of mine. I love these people. And so I did want to see their grandbaby's picture. But you're going to get the grandbaby picture one way or the other, so just ask for it right up front. Because they are excited about this new grandbaby. And with every right they should be. Absolutely. But at some point, we have to teach our children the difference. Toward the bottom of the page where it says, as Dr. Shaw points out, this is still the book Epidemic. As I said, his real point that he's making is the problem is not our children. That children are the symptoms. The parents are the epidemic. If I could grant any parents a single wish, I think what I would grant them is to be in control. That would mean different things at different ages. But I think that's what I would grant them. Because what that would give them, that would give them a little bit of a reset to where, okay, now you're in control. Now what are you going to do with this? You know, what are you going to do with this? And it's amazing to me how young a child can be to understand. Okay, I know that every time we go to somewhere there's a toy, you start fussing and you start whining and it gets pretty embarrassing. We're not going to do that anymore. We're through with that. Okay? We're finished with that. We'll find a way around it, but we're finished with that. And it's hard to get a reset though, isn't it? It's hard to get a reset. You can do it, but it's hard. It's difficult. It's difficult. is we cannot give up, we cannot give in. As we've already said, children will cease to do the things that don't work for them. The things they are doing that drive you crazy, they work for them. That's why they're doing it. And so if you want to stop it, then you've got to do something different. You've got to do something different. How many are familiar with the idea that this week we're training this young toddler? By Friday, you're going to Walmart and buying pull-ups. I'm not saying pull-ups don't have their place in potty training. I mean, you can argue that one way or the other. I know Sandy had decided it was going to be different from that. She decided that when it's time to potty train, we potty train. And that's all we do, and we don't give up on it, we don't give in on it. Even for a moment, we do it, and she could potty train all three of the girls in like 3 or 4 days. Done. 3 or 4 days. Because there was no giving up on it. Now, part of the thing that motivated that is that this is a few years back, understand, a lot of years back, when we were potty training, when she was potty training the girls, I won't claim to have done that, when she was potty training the girls, there was no disposable diaper in the house because they existed, but we couldn't afford them. We're talking the old kind of diaper with the plastic pants that kept it from, from leaking all over the place. And so once you commit there, you're committed. And so she would work for like 2 weeks to hype up those big girl pants. Pretty colors, fancy, nice. She would get some nice ones. Girls would be so proud, They had big girl pants. Well, they weren't about to wet those pants. They were too pretty. She had the training down. She had it working for her because she committed to it and she didn't give up. A lot of things about parenting are committing and then not giving up. It was actually James Dobson who I first heard say this. And as soon as I heard it said, I thought, man, that just speaks to a truth. And I'm talking a little bit older now, okay, for just a few minutes as we kind of draw to a close here. He said, you've got to discipline a child so that as they get older, you can ease up. He said by about age 12, you need to be able to ease up. Because they're maturing. They're struggling with growing up. And you need to let them grow up. They need to be able to make some decisions on their own. And you have to be okay with some half-good decisions that you put them in charge of making. Because if they don't make any decision until they leave home, the decisions they make when they leave home are not going to be well thought out. Parent came to me one day. Kids were younger than mine and knew I'd gone through 3 teenagers and cars and all that sort of thing, He said, I don't know what to do. He said, my son's not coming home when he's supposed to come home. And he's staying out too late, and I'm afraid of who he's with and what he might be doing. I looked at him, I said, how does he get around? Well, he's got his truck. I said, well, why does he still have it then? He said, well, I gave it to him. It's his truck. Mistake number 1, right? I face this a little differently than a lot of parents do, according to how far you're needing to go. Also, I had girls instead of boys. I always said if I'd had a boy, I'd have put him in an old pickup and say, son, when it breaks down, if you can't fix it, call me. I'll try to make time to get out there. But it was girls. You can't do that with girls. You don't want girls stranded on the side of the road, right? So you have to give them a little bit better something to drive. And maybe they're working and they're paying for it or whatever. They're trying to deserve it, whatever, I don't know. But, you just have to. But when Lindsay, my daughter that's back there that can't hear me right now, we gave her this car, and it was a nice little car, and it was a very safe car. And I told her, I said, you drive this car as long as you drive it well. I said, that car can disappear in a moment if you don't deal with it the way you ought to. And I had a plan. I had it thought out. If she had acted out in any particular way that was worthy of it, I would have taken the keys, gone and got in the car and stored it. I've got a buddy that was the general manager for the local car dealership. It would have been on the back of his lot somewhere under lock and key, and she would have never seen it had she searched all over town for it. Because I told her, I give it to you and I can take it away. And you better know that. They come in one night. This car wasn't a sporty little car. It tried to act like it was a sporty car, but it couldn't go anywhere at all. But it had a tachometer in it. And we lived up this big hill. Leanne, the middle daughter, is kind of cranky at Lindsay, her older sister, and so she's going to get her in a little trouble. She said, Dad, when we came home, said Lindsay was speeding up the hill. She shouldn't be driving like that. Lindsay says, I wasn't going that fast. She said, Dad, that thing you talking about over there, it was on the 5. Now, she wasn't talking about the speedometer saying she was doing 50. She was saying it was turning 5,000 RPMs coming up that hill. And this was not a car that pegged out at 8,200 RPM. This was a car that pegged out at about 5,500, okay? And so I looked back at her. We had a little talk about that, okay? A friend of mine came home, the car had a leak on the oil pan. He's like, well, Dad, that track was too bumpy and I hit that track. He said, well, let's go, son. Put the son in the passenger side. He got on the other side. He said, son, I'm headed toward that track. About how fast were you going? He said, well, he didn't know what to say about how fast he was going because his dad was about to prove to him that the car has got to bottom out when it goes over that track to bust that oil pan. He said, so how fast were you going? He went over the track, didn't do a thing. He said, apparently you weren't going that speed, And he went through this scenario until the track, and you're like, wow, man, that's a lot of work. Made his point really well. By the time I'm getting to the third daughter, I figured this thing out, right? By the time I get to Whitney, I'm choosing my battles. I'm not fighting everyone. I'm stopping it before it gets too bad and saying, hey, learn your lesson right here. If you want to keep going, I'm with you, But otherwise, we can stop it right here. Well, she calls me one night, out with a friend of hers. Now, it was a young lady that I thought a lot of. I knew her parents well. And she calls me on the phone. And this is about 9:30, 10 o'clock. She says, Dad, what kind of mood are you in? What do you need? Because I knew if I needed to be in a certain mood, then there was a problem, right? She said, I'm stuck. I said, you're stuck? Yes, we went out to where they're building their new house and whatever the girl's name says, you can turn around out here in front of the house. Well, you can't. It was muddy and the car was buried up. And, well, I was building a house. I had ropes and chains in the trucks. So I go out there, and I've decided already because I've learned this by this time. You understand this, Josh, very well. I'm not going to go and embarrass my child in front of their friend because that's what she's expecting, because that's what she deserves. I'm going to give her more than that. And giving her more than that, she's going to appreciate it. I literally walk up, pull the truck up there, get the rope, then I just walk over, peck on the windshield, or not the windshield, the side window. Rolls the window down. I said, how are you ladies doing this evening? And they said, you could see Whitney going, not great, What do you ladies need? Do you need me to pull you out of here? They said, yes. And by this time, Whitney's thinking, okay, he's not going to totally embarrass me, you know. And so I hooked the hook on. I backed the truck up, pull them out. And the only thing that almost went sideways was that as she came out, she still had the gas on, and she almost hit the front of my truck. Now, if she had hit the front of my truck, that would have been a little bit of a challenge. Now, I'm not particular about my truck. It's just that when you hit your own vehicle, that is not good for your insurance guy. Ask my wife. She ran into my truck one time, but don't remind her. You know, that just doesn't work very well. And so I pull them out. I go out and get the rope, take it all up, put it back in the back of the truck. I walked by and I tapped on the window again. I said, "You ladies have a great evening." Then I just drove off. Now, Whitney's still thinking she's in trouble. But she's not really. I mean, she made a silly decision about where she could drive out in a construction zone. But I don't have any real expectations of her knowing her way around a construction zone and what sure she should or should not be driving. Well, it just so happened I'm out on the porch when it comes time for when she gets home. I wasn't out on the porch to wait for her. I just walked out on the porch because I walked out on the porch. But she thought I was there to wait on her. So she walks up and very sheepishly says, "Okay, give it to me." You know, like, I know I deserve it. And it was a great teaching moment. Because again, she's my third child. I've got a little presence of mind by this point. And I looked at her and I said, "Whitney," I said, "if you do something wrong and mean-spirited," I said, "you're going to have me to deal with. You are." I said, "But that was just silly." I said, "That's all I got to say about that." And I walked back in the house. And I'm going to tell you this. It's hard. It's hard as a parent to gain respect of your 15-year-old child. You have to be creative to do it. And I think I was just being creative that night. But I did. Because I gained some respect from a 15-year-old child who's hard to get respect out of that night. A lot of parenting is being creative, and a lot of parenting is to remind yourself just you're a child of yours as they are a child of their God. How about I give a little mercy? How about I give grace? Dobson was right. But what the key to Dobson being right on that, you have to ease up as they get older, is that you have to have discipline with a child to the level that you can ease up and everything still be okay. When they're 13 is not the time to double down and decide it's time for some real discipline. If you waited that long, you waited way too late, right? You waited way too late. And the thing to remember about having young children is you want to have these children trained so that when they are 12, you can ease up on them and let them grow up. And that's one of the great keys, I think, to good parenting. You've got to ease up. The last phrase there is, be ready to ease up, grow up. It's the only way that they will grow. I was going to have time for some questions. That didn't work out. I need to be through in about 3 minutes, so I'm going to stop by telling you a story. Haven't done that so far tonight, have I? I was talking to my nephew the other day. My nephew, Aaron, is 45 years old. He's an engineer for Toyota, Mississippi. Not only is he an engineer, he's a high-level executive in that plant for Toyota. Well, he's not at Toyota, Mississippi now. He actually just got moved to Alabama. In Alabama, Toyota has just built a new small plant where that they're going to make a Toyota vehicle on this line and a Mazda vehicle on this line under the Toyota Mazda name, but Toyota plant, and they sent Aaron over to run that plant because they're trying to move him around enough to give him the expertise, I'm assuming the way it sounds these days, he'll probably be the head of Toyota Mississippi in a few years. But Aaron was telling me, and he was telling me about a book that he had just read, that I have since read, and it's just one of the most phenomenal things that I have read in years. It's a book called The Modern Self, and he's talking about the psychologization of the self and who we are these days. And Aaron, being a pretty sharp guy, this is a guy who's done a lot of preaching in his young life. He's done a lot of teaching. He's worked pro bono as a campus minister in the church that he's at now. He's a great young man who has got a very spiritual mindset and just sharp as he can be. And he told me, he said, Uncle Steve, he said, I have decided that my problem at the plant, because he had just done a 2-year stint as head of HR in his little rotation that they've got him doing all over the plant. So he said, I can't hire anybody in their 20s that will work and stay with the job. He said, I haven't hired anybody under 30 who has stayed with me in 6 months. Now, the interesting thing is he didn't say, kids these days, you know. What he said was, he said, I think I've noticed something in all of my studies. He said, I remember back to my own life. He said, you know, I graduated with an engineering degree at 23, probably about 23, probably so. He said, I worked the first 2 jobs I worked before I really even decided what direction I wanted my career to go in. He said, I wasn't really caring, you know, whether I worked here long term. I wasn't feeling very loyal to them. He said, but about 25 or 26, I decided it's time to grow up. He said, and so I decided to get serious about working and being responsible and being loyal. He said, and at the time I decided that, he said the average age of marriage was, and he gave exactly what the age was. He said the average age of marriage is 4 years beyond that right now. He said the maturing process is taking longer. He said a young person that I hire is not really ready to buckle down and work until they're 30. And I thought, Aaron, I think you're right. We're growing up later. We're assuming responsibility later. We're staying in college longer. We're taking longer to go through college. And I'm not saying all of that's even a bad thing. Because I think there's an argument is that many a generation pushed people to grow up before it was even time to grow up. We pushed people to be responsible adults with family before their brain even stopped growing. That wasn't too smart. Because in reality, waiting to get married longer is probably actually a good thing. But what he was saying was, you don't complain about the people you're dealing with. You try to see them and realize who they are, and realize that people just are maturing later as far as really being ready to hit the workforce and to do a good job. And he was right. He was right about that. I had a better place to stop than that, but time is saying I need to stop because I have a commitment. My commitment out is we're out by 8 every night, okay? All right, appreciate your time.